but here we go. Hey guys, super awkward intro because my microphone just cut out and we're doing it again. Ugh. And I'm gonna stare at my microphone the whole time during today's show. But welcome to the Pig Daily. It's episode number 39. I had a really busy weekend. We had 50 people come down to the Pig Daily. It was awesome. I just told the guys on Twitch about this, but for you guys on YouTube, if you're in Sydney, definitely come down to the next one. We had a lot of beers, a lot of barbecues. There was some good memeage going on, and it was a lot of fun. So yeah, thanks for hanging out, guys. Apparently my lips are out of sync with the audio now as well. Jesus Christ. I'm sorry, guys. Today we're going to be all out of sync. It's just, that's the way it's going to happen. Otherwise, we need to turn the stream off and on, which is just too much trouble. So you guys are just going to deal with like the weirdness of me being slightly out of sync. It's okay. Most of today's episode is going to be in-game anyway, so you won't have to look at this strangeness. So yeah, guys, today we're talking about PvT. We're talking about specifically Warp Prism counterattacking in PvT and shutting down early aggression. Now, we started thinking about this a lot because we've been really enjoying Artosis commentary lately, as well as his blogs he's been writing. So if you guys haven't read any of his SC Dojo blog, you've definitely got to read it. He just has these really great, just like small little pieces in the meta articles he's been kind of focusing on lately. And I guess that's kind of what today's thing is as well. One of the big things, I guess, if we talk about how we got to this point, a few months ago, Artosis has just been talking a lot about how Warp Prisms are so important in PvT, and how, for instance, like MC is a player who's a little bit, he's great, but he's also a bit sloppy at the moment. He kept like running his Warp Prism to his death in some PvTs, but he'd instantly rebuild it. All the Protoss players do this. Whenever their Warp Prism goes down at the high levels, like it's so crucial to have a Warp Prism pressuring the Terran, and the earlier that prism gets over there, the stronger. So something which I was just kind of explaining there when my mic cut out was the strongest builds we've seen in the last few months have always involved a Warp Prism getting to the Terran's base really early. The builds which feel the most bullshit, the ones where either a Warp Prism rocks up and just warps in a billion units and kills the Terran, or even more common, the Warp Prism rocks up, puts on a hell of a lot of pressure without that much investment, and the Protoss just macros up really hard behind it. So that's actually something which we saw develop with Zest's build. If you're not familiar with Zest's build, basically he just ran up to 4 bases, got a Warp Prism out really early, so he'd be pressuring the mineral lines, forcing up like turrets and just general units being spread around the base, while doing one of the absolute greediest openings ever. He would take like a 6-minute fourth or something like that, like sometimes even earlier, like just crazy greed. And he'd do it while putting heaps of pressure on. So it felt like it was so hard for Terran to not just take heaps of damage to the pressure without way over committing to defense and falling infinitely far behind. And this is a pattern I've seen throughout. So lately, what's happened in the meta is Terran players are feeling more and more forced to pressure right at the start of the game. Gas first has become the standard to get that pressure going just a little bit earlier. And often we're seeing that kind of hit at a point where the Terran wants to grab control of the game. He's still expanding behind it, wants to do some damage, have a bit of a slower transition behind it, but he's got these kind of a few waves of early aggression to mess the Protoss player up. And I think what a lot of Protoss players have done in response to this, and this is not necessarily your pro players, but your players on ladder, is they've kind of pulled into their shell a bit, and they're like, oh, just defend, just defend, just defend. And people get kind of stuck in this really like defensive set, which I think is very uncomfortable for a lot of players to play. And it's also usually a little bit harder to defend in StarCraft, because your opponent, he's got like a set plan of actions he's going to do, and you're trying to react only at the last minute when you see everything. I think it's much easier if you create space for yourself in StarCraft. You put a bit of pressure on your opponent. So if you're someone who's sick of kind of being in the back foot, that's what this episode is for. It's all about a very specific response, especially against gas first openings from Terran, where as a Protoss, you cut the Twilight Council early on and you say, we don't need those upgrades straight away because we're just going to shut down the early aggression, make sure we have an observer for Widow Mines, and then immediately get a Warp Prism and just go across that map and either kill the Terran player with the Warp Prism, just non-stop warp-ins, or just put on a lot of pressure while macroing behind it and basically force it to be, okay, I defend one wave of aggression from Terran, and then I'm in his face, and he needs to just like turtle up for the next 5-6 minutes. So it really just says, well, all right, I'll sit back for one tiny moment and then I'm just going to throw all the pressure back onto you. And that is where things start to work out. So, like I said, it's a reaction. Let's go into game and let's look at one first game. We want to start out by looking at stopping some forms of aggression. And we'll start out by looking at one of the most all-in forms of aggression. So the game I have for you guys here is... All right, I shouldn't be using this overlay for this, should I? Oops. I just realized that my overlay is not necessarily the best for this, but that's all right, whatevs. So let's turn that sound on. So what we have is Drogo versus Massa. Now this is a game from IEM Shanghai, very recent game, and Massa goes for a super aggressive build. Now in this specific game, it's not gas first, it's barracks gas. But you can see he goes for an insanely fast second gas, and that means he's going to be doing something on one base for a long time, because he's not going to have enough minerals to afford a command center. So Drogo's going to come in, he's going to see this, and he's obviously just going to say, oh, I don't need to see anything else, man. You can't get a command center. I know you're going to get a factory. I know you're going to make a starport after that. Like, I don't know exactly what's coming out of it. But I'm sure specifically because of the meta at the time this game was played, Drogo has in his mind a very fast tank marine push, and potentially even a cyclone, some cyclones into tanks, and definitely bunkers, just because that's what's common here. However, even if you have no idea what's going on, you can do this same sort of reaction even just against a gas first, at least for the initial stage, and especially against anyone going 2 gas, which is, you've done your standard opening. For anyone who's not familiar with standard PvT openings, this is not the video for you. Let's fast forward a little bit. We're going to take everything up to this point as granted. You want to go immediately for Robo when you can afford it, after obviously starting a gateway unit and out of your cyber core. Now this Robo can be slightly delayed if you, for instance, are dealing with like a fast Reaper or something, and you wanted to build an Adept and a Mothership core because that's something which you prefer to do. That's something you can do, that's fine. It'll delay the Robo slightly, not the biggest deal. Now what you'll notice here is, where is the Chrono Boost? Bam! Warp Gate Research, very important whenever you're dealing with an aggressive build in PvT, even just a gas first build. If you want to be like crazy safe against it, which is what we're talking about today, you want to be Chrono Boosting that, and you also want to be building out of this gateway non-stop. I often don't even Chrono Boost the gateway myself, but Drogo here is treating this very seriously, and he's saying, I am just going to Chrono Boost gateway units non-stop. And then only when he gets the money does he drop 2 gateways. Notice non-stop probing in the meantime. Observer starting out of the Robo. Observer only costs 25 minerals, does not cost a lot of minerals. But then adding these 2 gateways, the moment he has the cash, which should be soon after 3 minutes, it should always be well before 3 minutes 30, and that is going to allow these gateways to finish and warp in a round of units in time for 4 minutes. And 4 minutes is that scary moment we were talking about where the player can hit you. So now notice Drogo paused on his gateway for like 2 seconds when this Stalker finished, and then immediately started another Stalker. Basically, he's just doing everything he can to keep constant production going on this gateway. Now, in this particular scenario, his opponent hasn't taken a natural. Let's remember, he knows there's no natural because of those double gases. He knows if there is one that goes down, it's hugely delayed. So he's not worried about the Warp Prism. That's the second stage. He's just worried about defending. Often, if you saw they had an expansion, you'd just be defending with the gateway units, the Mothership core. And then instead of going for an Immortal here, you'd be like, yeah, let's get the Warp Prism started straight away. But in this scenario, Drogo's doing a very special defense. Because he knew there was nothing coming earlier, he kind of metagamed and started the Mothership core really late. Something you should only do if you really recognize what you're up against exactly. But notice, at 4 minutes, there are 4 gateway units and the Mothership core out. And most importantly, there are 3 gateways finished and Warp Gate Research is finished. This is a very important benchmark if you want to be shutting down aggressive play in PvT. You need to have these gateways ready because you want to be warping in 3 extra units. And with your standard setup, this allows you to have 4 units, say at the natural, and the Mothership core defending the main. And often your Mothership core would have enough energy for 2 overcharges by this point because you'd be getting that much earlier. But you can also very quickly do a warp in of 3 units during the action if you need support on either side. So this says, for instance, if 2 Hellions ran in the natural, your 4 units will shut it down. A drop comes in the main at the same time with 2 Widow Mines. You overcharge and shut that down. Or it would normally be like a 6 Marine drop in the main or 8 Marine drop, because obviously they wouldn't have enough factory build time to have got out 2 Hellions and 2 Widow Mines by 4 minutes. Yeah. Cool. Now, this is obviously a very specific timing. 1 base all in. Marine tank push. Drogo says, yep, I gotta fight you before the bunkers finish. He got that first warp in of units we talked about. Pulls probes. He's also got an Immortal out, though it doesn't really get to join the party that much. And he just kind of shuts this down. Now keep in mind, Drogo, it looked like he kind of had an idea of what was coming this whole game. But nonetheless, it looked like he knew what was coming. But this generally is the same sort of structure you want to be looking at whenever you're dealing with some sort of like heavy aggression from Terran. And we saw there a very clean way of shutting everything down. Now, keep in mind the big thing we're focusing on today is saying we don't need a Twilight Council that fast against early aggression from Terran. A lot of players get so stuck on that idea of I need Blink, I need Glaives. A lot of the time with these early types of aggression, you're dealing with unupgraded Marines, Widow Mines, Siege Tanks, Liberators, these units in small numbers looking to catch you out of position or with not enough units. And the entire point of that is just for you just not to have enough stuff. If you want to shut it down, all you need is just to have enough units. So you're prioritizing Robo because obviously Observer is essential against Widow Mines as well as for scouting. And gateways, just so you can have unit production. Not to mention, as well as that, it's the consistent gateway production as well as the chrono boost on the cyber core for that warp gate research. So now we're going to take a look at some Showtime versus Massa replays. So I think we'll start with New Gettysburg. Yep. So we've already got a good question from LVPVs. He says, could something else hit that requires another reaction? And what else would we scout for? Well, basically your observer just goes across the map and takes a look around. And you deal with each situation as it comes. There's technically infinite kind of combinations in StarCraft. So there's always like definitely things, there's always an unlimited number of things which could require reactions. That's something you've always got to take into account in StarCraft. I'm just getting all my settings ready for this next replay. So definitely that there's always going to be potential other options, but in terms out of the good ones, like this as a base is going to be completely fine up to that 4-minute mark. Maybe you need to change it up from there because your opponent's going 1 base, 2 port Banshee or something like really weird and ridiculous, and you need to warp in more Stalkers or get a Stargate to get some Phoenix to shut them down. Something like that. There's always these kind of crazy options, but for the most part, just getting gateway units in a mothership core, it's kind of like a one-size-fits-all. This is going to keep you safe at that early stage. You've got detection, you've got gateway units in large enough numbers that you can overwhelm anything that comes your way. 2 thumbs up, feel good about yourself. You should be fine. All right, guys. So let's look at another game now. Now this one here is going to be. Oh, okay, so the overlay doesn't load because it's an old replay. Sorry about that. So I've got to change the settings in the menu outside of it, but that's okay, it doesn't matter. We actually have a lot of information with this anyway. I will have to just change my hotkeys very quickly. Unfortunately, hotkeys have been bugging in replays for me lately. Just a little weird issue. So anyway, this is Showtime versus Massa, game 2 from IAM Shanghai in the round of 8. Showtime's up a game, and what we're going to see is gas first. And let's just talk about this Terran opening first of all, so you guys can really understand what we're talking about facing. Gas into barracks, so slightly delayed barracks. And then he's just going to take an expansion with it while getting up a nice fast factory after his Marine or Reaper. And it is a Marine that comes out. Now Showtime kind of kept that probe in here. He kind of got locked in. And he does see that it's a factory and a Marine, so he knows he's not worried about a Reaper. And he did see no second gas, so he does want to check at some point to make sure there is a command center down. However, at the high level, a lot of players won't even check for that until their observer's out. Why? Because they just 90% of the time you know, that's what the Terran player is doing. And the thing is, there isn't even necessarily a big specific response if they haven't taken that command center, because Showtime's response is going to be super safe anyway. So what do we notice here? Chrono boosting Stalkers. Interestingly, Showtime not chrono boosting his Cybercore until now. He preferred to get that first Stalker out as quickly as possible and only then go for that. Now what's really cool you've got to think about here is the map. On this map there's no Reaper paths. A Reaper cannot walk through whatever this little garden is. A Reaper cannot walk through that little garden. So the only jump paths are here, and you can walk up the ramp. So Reaper's really bad here, which is why, you know, you don't necessarily need much defense against them. You don't need to worry about your pylon placement in that regard. And just getting a Stalker out very early is going to make him very safe. But what we see once again, very fast Robo, constant gateway production, a single scouting Hellion comes in, and what are we talking about? 2 more gateways. Now remember, because he was distracted by the Hellion, these gateways are slightly late. Remember, you really want these down significantly before 3 minutes 30, preferably at 3 minutes 15, 3 minutes 20. This last gateway only just went down just before 3 minutes 30, so not the absolute fastest, but that should be okay. I mean, a Hellion did already get thrown away, so that's okay. Immediately builds an Observer, just constant probe production in the meantime. And this is what we're talking about, that next stage. Even before the aggression is hit, Showtime is already diving into that Warp Prism. Now, if you want to play this a little bit safer, you can wait till you have like 5, get that first warp in of gateway units in, get 6 gateway units, you know, 3 at each base or something, plus the mothership core, and then build the Warp Prism, that's fine. Obviously, when you're watching the best players in the world, they're going to cut a corner. They're going to go straight for that as quickly as possible because they know what they can get away with, or sometimes they're taking a slight risk in that regard. And here we see a Widowmine drop coming in at 4 minutes. And let's check out that setup. We know 4 minutes is the danger timing. Great pylon triangle around this mineral line. Now you'll notice with these 2 pylons, they're actually close enough to the nexus, so they're both fast warp-in pylons. This one down here isn't, but this is very important to shut down Liberators. Otherwise Liberators would have way too much space to be annoying down here. So the mothership core can defend this main mineral line really well with, like I said in that previous one, you should have double overcharge by now, over 100 energy. And meanwhile, your gateway units should be sitting at the natural. So 3 gateway units can defend the natural. It was 4 in the previous game. This time it's only 3. Showtime's had 1 less than Drogo. But the gateways are about to finish as well. So in just seconds, you'll be able to reinforce with a full warp in as well. And you can see here, Medevac tries to come in, activates an overcharge, has to turn around and just leave the base. Alright, so the first wave of pressure has been shut down. Now this is where things start to get really interesting, because you've deflected that first wave, but remember, what are we talking about today? We're talking about not just sitting back and just defending. So many players at this point would just take a 3rd Nexus and just sit there with their units. But look at this, Showtime is already being proactive with his units and trying to hunt down the rotation of this medevac. He saw that the medevac kind of rotated up. He just ran out there with his stalkers trying to catch it, and he's warping in lots of units. That Warp Prism is already out and heading across the map. And that's what this is about. Remember, you've cut the Twilight Council, so now you want to just get to the other side of the map and put the pressure back on the Terran. And there's a little bit of a dicey moment here, because you're trying to move out against very mobile units. So your mothership core needs to kind of rotate into between your 2 bases and try to defend both mineral lines while your units run across the map and start attacking the Terran player. Now, why is this so effective? Look at that Terran production. He just doesn't have anything. A single reactor barracks, stim, and combat shields haven't even started. Yes, he's starting to build tanks, and he's got a starport. No add-ons. He's got just a reactor and a tech lab. No more production, only just putting an engineering bay down now. Terran has to commit a lot to put on this pressure so early. These production buildings are building units rather than building add-ons, rather than spending the money building extra production earlier. Terran really love to power up in their production, cut unit production a bit and just add add-ons and more production. But with this sort of build, they don't get a chance to do that. So the sooner you can get over there and start threatening them, the harder it is for Terran. And really, that's why they're always forced into siege tanks, because they just can't defend their bases properly, especially against Warp Prisms. And the threat of, say, Blink Stalkers hitting the front. they really need these long-ranged units to try and create a strong zone around their ramp, which we'll talk more about later. So for now, Showtime's just getting out of that map really hungrily with these stalkers. Now notice his stalkers are chasing in the direction he thinks the units are coming from, and the way he can stop them. Meanwhile, that single observer, still just doing this off a single observer. So that's something else. Rather than building like 4 observers to have full map vision, you say, I'm going to scout by putting the pressure on my opponent. I'm going to make it so he can't sneak units across the map to drop me or to Widow Mine drop me, by just putting the pressure on him. And look at this, actually catches a Liberator. Really smart movement here by Showtime. And he has this observer here ready to try and spot that drop rotation in case it came down. He doesn't know the drop actually has just turned around and decided to run home. And his Warp Prism set up and he's warping in Stalkers. Now keep in mind, all he's been doing at home is building probes, building pylons, no third Nexus, doesn't even have gases on his natural yet. However, we see here, as he's hitting with these Stalkers, he's moving out to take that third Nexus. And that's exactly what is so fantastic about this build. This is where you hit the point where you have options and you can play however the hell you choose. It's all about, do you want to just keep warping units and just go for the throat and try to kill your opponent? Or are you just going to pressure here, try to get a bit of damage done, but you're already expanding behind it? And it's very flexible based on how you want to play it, but usually you don't go all in because, you know, you could drop like 3 more gateways and just go all in here, right? 3 or 4 more gateways. Go up to like 6 or 7 gates and just YOLO! And that can work. Definitely based on the meta you're in, what you've seen from your opponent, your own star sense, your own kind of intuition. You can try that out if you want to. And I actually think it would work a lot of the time. However, if you want to play that more macro-oriented version, you've already got in your mind your transition. You're already thinking about that. And you're thinking, let's get as much damage as we can get done here. But all we really need to do is just kill a few SCVs, but most importantly, keep him pinned back, pick off just a couple of units, make sure he's stuck at home so he can't be pressuring me, because that allows us to cut, you know, those extra observers earlier and get away with it. Allows us to take the, you know, the later third base, the slightly later upgrades and all that sort of stuff, and then still thrive. So let's take a look at how Showtime does this. We're going to swap onto Showtime's view, just so you guys can see first person how he does it. So he's dropping a Nexus, starting to add gases because he's way oversaturated, and he's hitting that main with that Warp Prism. And he's saying, okay, cool, here we go, 4 Stalker drop. Let's just pick off some SCVs. It's like, alright, add a few Adepts in here, this is wide open, this is awesome. And his Stalkers move into the natural at the same time. Sees the tank and the Marines are still there. And that specific poke at the natural, that's really interesting. That was literally just seeing, if Master just grabbed everything and moved it up, his army would have been getting up to here, right? At that point. So those Stalkers would have come in, found like an empty bunker, blasted it down, started killing SCVs. Instead, he said, oh no, you've still got a tank and Marines in the bunker. So these Stalkers, just by checking that, have done their job. They've said, you have to leave those units here. A lot of players, when they're doing multi-prong, think everything needs to be attacking at once. Not so. Sometimes you just need to check that your opponent's covering all their bases. So he's going to move forward, tries to snipe the tank, doesn't quite manage to get it. There's some good repair, plus a medevac placed very well there. So he's going to pull out for now. And he's just going to be like, okay, transition time, Twilight Council, double forge, and oh, I made a huge mistake. Just completely misclicked his Warp Prism. He thought he clicked it out of the base, and he actually didn't. So suddenly, what should have been constant pressure for the next units, like there was no good way for Master to fully shut this down, suddenly turns into, oh shit, that didn't work out how we wanted it to as well. But that's not really what we're focusing on this game. What we're focusing on is the situation he was in. Before that Warp Prism died, so let's just think about it. He's just got so much pressure on. He killed like 6 or 7 SCVs. And he's in this friggin' beautiful position. So check this out. 55 probes to 35 SCVs. He's got a third almost finished. Going double forge and Twilight. You know, whatever transition you prefer. 3 more gateways are about to go down. You can transition drones over to the third straight away. Like this is a great position for him to be in. Now, what's the big thing he's missing? Remember, it's that Twilight Council. There's like, what the hell? It's 6 minutes and no glaives, no blink. That is a big pain in the ass. That really weakens this mid-game Protoss force. However, that's why you've got to keep that Warp Prism alive. So, no doubt, we're going to see a Warp Prism start up immediately. Whenever you lose a Warp Prism, be like, oh shit, get it up again. And he's even going to pull his Stalkers home. But, on the other side, it's like, yeah, Command Center's finishing. You know, Master's not in a bad position by any means. But if that Warp Prism was still alive, I think he would be in struggle on Struggle Street. He'd be on Struggle Street right now. He'd be pooping himself a little bit. So yeah, look at this. 2 barracks production at this point. Why? Because he's been forced into multiple siege tanks. 3 siege tanks, being forced to build medevacs earlier. Like, it really does hurt a lot the more of these tech units you force out of Terran. Because if that factory was just building reactors this whole time, these barracks would already be building with reactors that they've already, you know, set up on. The factory's like pre-built them for them. Instead, the bio kind of explosion is going to take much longer, and this is going to give Protoss all the time he needs to get that 1-1, get that blink, and even a douche Templar Shrine. Oh, he runs his Warp Prism into this Widow Mine. But yeah, you know, there's just, it's so powerful, the Warp Prism. Should be picking up those 2 adepts in the front, I think. But doing this, another force rotating on the right-hand side. Get out of there, Warp Prism, you die to that Widow Mine, man. Once again, the main army at the front, just making sure he's actually got units there, which he does, so he's going to cancel that for sure. And remember, he doesn't even have glaives yet, but +2 armor starting, 4th Nexus is starting. He's keeping the Terran at home. He's got a few observers placed around now. And he's just shrekking the economy. Because Warp Prisms are a good unit, man. That's my high-level analysis for today. Warp Prism, good unit. Alright, guys. So let's, I'm going to open up a replay one more time, but I want you guys to already shout out questions, because I don't want to do an insanely long episode today, so I'd like to round it up very, very soon. That's essentially it, guys. So what are the main points we've been talking about? I'm going to open up the last replay of this. It was actually game 1 of this series, because it was the same sort of just robo 3-gate counterattack with a Warp Prism really hard, and, you know, get in a great position with it and just constantly harass with it. It was one where he didn't lose the Warp Prism and he just kept poking it around. But I'm going to kind of glance at that replay while we do question time. So I want you guys to shout out any questions. Use the @x5_pig tag. That should be fantastic. And that should be awesome. So yeah, hit me up with those questions in chat. I'm going to scroll up and we will see. Oh, Northern Hawk, thank you so much for the sub, mate. I really appreciate it. It was awesome meeting you the other day. Barcode Polo. Silliest nickname ever, but it was cool to meet you, man. I hope to see you at the next one as well. Alright. So, loading these old replays. Sorry, just got to very quickly fix up the sounds at the start. And there we go. Okay, so while I answer questions, we are going to kind of take a glance at this replay, showing that same thing. So I'm going to put it on, oh, I got to do the hotkeys as well, apparently, every single time, because the default hotkeys don't work as they should. So, alright, Vantage says, Pig, is there any way to adapt this to 2 Warp Prisms? It's a much bigger commitment with 2 Warp Prisms. You definitely want to watch CJ Heroes games in Pro League, as well as Star League and everything, but mainly Pro League. I think he was doing it even in Code A, Code A of Star League, if I remember correctly. So, spots the gas first. Clicks on that gas, realizes there's going to be over 100 gas mined as that barracks finishes. The barracks is going to finish at 1:30, which is gas first barracks. Yep. Yeah, so that's a good question. Is there any way to adapt this to 2 Warp Prisms? I think definitely you could squeeze out a second Warp Prism, but you always need to commit a lot more there, and you probably always want to go up to like 4 or 5 gateways and commit to a much bigger pressure if you're going to bother doing that Vantage. So you'd just queue up a second Prism after the first one, add a few more gateways, and aim to do it that way. You might want to squeeze in a 3rd Nexus even before doing that. I'm not you know, depending on how economic, how all in you want to go, that's based up to you. But hitting with 2 Warp Prisms is very strong. Hero is doing it a lot. It was really abusive. Some games he messed up the micro and it looked really bad because it has a really high skill ceiling. But yeah, you can just do so much with 2 Warp Prisms. It's a Terran nightmare. How should you react as Terran if you scout this build, says Diamond Tie? Now this is a good question. I think definitely what we can kind of learn from the Terran perspective here is that you don't want to throw your units away. If your opponent, you know, like if you're playing at a high level and your opponents are starting to be prepared for the first wave of pressure like this, with the Warp Prism and good pylon placement in one base, and then the gateway units down in the main base, and then the gateway units in the natural, don't just YOLO your first medevac. You know, as you're in there, always stare at your first medevac drop and be ready to pull it out at the first moment of, oh, he's overcharging, get out of there. And don't ever put yourself in it right on top of a pylon, right? Because then you won't have time to get away. So save your boost if possible, be very careful. In the follow-up, I think it's very important to potentially getting out a Viking, I think is something which is amazing up to a pretty high level because you can really shut down a Warp Prism. Other players like to use a Liberator because even though a Liberator can't necessarily shoot a Warp Prism down very quickly, it can keep up with it. Personally, I think even just what we've seen from Massa and some of the other high-level Terrans recently is actually useful enough, where basically they get siege tanks to cover, you know, both sides of the base, and they always try and have depots on the edge of their base, spotting for where the Warp Prism can come in from, and they try to react to it as quickly as possible by getting those units over there. Definitely squeezing out a Viking can make a big difference. The other thing you can do is sometimes you can boost a medevac or two onto the Warp Prism. So even when it's running away, you can drop Marines on top of it, and that can help to stop it getting out of there. Fear Dragon says, Pig, how do you identify when you should bring your Warp Prism home to defend or to attack the front? Well, I don't think you ever need a Warp Prism to defend. I don't think it's useful because your pylons are going to have good warping distance here anyway. However, for attacking the front, it all comes down to your judgment. Often dropping, you know, you can do a warp in at the front and then still load 4 units up. So you can reinforce the front with a Warp Prism, and then it's still almost always stronger to load up 4 Adepts or Stalkers and drop them in the main base while the rest of your army hits the front. Unless you're going all in, it's not that important to actually have the Warp Prism set up at the front for the duration of the engagement. Alright. So guys, let me just commentate this game a little bit here. What we're going to see here is probably the scarier gas first opening. 2 Hellions to hit one side, while a drop with 6 Marines and a Widow Mine hits the other side. So what's the setup? In this game, Showtime has chosen to have the mothership at the natural. Whilst the gateway units we talked about, remember 3 or 4 gateway units from that constant gateway production, are in the main. But once again, same thing, it was Robo into 2 more gateways. Warp Prism is already under construction once more, and he's already starting to warp in these units to buffer up that defense. So check this out. Hellions come in like, nope. Medevac comes in and just gets shut down. Now this is just fantastic positioning from Showtime. Really more than anything else. Excuse me, guys. My throat is killing me. Woohoo. He does have an observer out though. Let's see where the observer did actually go to the other side of the map. It does catch a Liberator coming across as well, but that was very smart positioning. Showtime just said, look, pylon here, warp in a few more units to buffer it up. As long as I'm watching for the overcharge, it'll be good. 3 Stalkers there. These units are watching from here, and people almost always drop the left-hand side while the unit's coming from the right. He could technically have brought the medevac around here, and then Showtime would have been a bit out of position, but it still wouldn't have been the absolute end of the world. It just would have been a little bit of a pain in the butt. So we're going to fast forward. Catches the Liberator and damages it, forces him back. And once again, no Twilight Council behind this. Oh, he's going to just dive forward and get that Liberator. Very nicely done by Showtime. He's got the units here. He's got a Warp Prism here as well. Can use that to micro the Stalkers to warp in more of them. Unfortunately, he does lose his Observer. But he's going to try and drop on top of the Siege Tank. But 3 more Marines popped out just barely in time. He decides better of it and does pull back. But you could see there, if Massa was like even slightly messed up on his production, those Stalkers just drop on that Siege Tank. Everything comes in. He warps in another round of units and it's game over. You've got 3 unupgraded Marines and a siege tank popping out at the time. It's not that many units. With a few more Adepts and Stalkers in here, you're going to take massive SCV losses to hold this. Already, Showtime finds himself in that driver's seat and really controls the pace of the game from here. Hellions do run in here and get 5 or 6 kills, which is not too bad. It's actually a very good run by there to pull the pressure home, force Showtime to micro home. But once again, we're going to start seeing that transition. The Twilight Council going down. Third Nexus was later this game. I think it's because the Hellions killed it. Killed the probe going out there before. And he will be going for Forges soon as well. But check this out. This Warp Prism, it just came in, killed 2 SCVs. And there's just no mobile answer to it. Now, at the highest level, players don't like to get that Viking. Why do they not like to get the Viking? It's because the Viking is useless, other than for kind of pushing away the Warp Prism. And one of the problems is, if he just drops Stalkers, say the Viking's up here, the Warp Prism can fly and be like, oh god, I'm getting shot, drop Stalkers and kill the Viking. So at the highest level, with the highest levels of control, a Viking is not a very good response to this. And I guess that's why we almost never see Terran players doing it. Instead, they rely on medevacs to maneuver their tanks, and their tanks to keep everything solid. Usually a bunker at the front, and eventually getting a wall off there sometimes as well to stop Adepts coming in. And then trying to have that main ball of Marines move around and just get underneath that Warp Prism. Something which I think Massa is lacking this game is having a depot there, and a depot there. And also, personally, I would love to have a depot either there or there. Because I think if we look at his vision, there are a few grey bits. There are a few areas where he'd just like to see it a bit further out, which angle that Warp Prism's coming in from, so that these Marines can be in position. Because look at this, Showtime just, you know, goes in, focus fires an SCV or 2, flies on out. And he can do this for days. Now, obviously, this is very much based on your APM requirements, but likewise, your opponent's responses will also be handicapped by their APM requirements. You don't need to go in every 30 seconds like Showtime does, bounces back, adds his 2 Forges, keeps up probes, adds 3 pylons, and then immediately goes back in. You can take a little bit longer to do this if you're doing it yourself in whatever league you're in, but you always get to see, of course, the ideal ways of executing it like this. And Massa here just, you know, he's struggling really hard, trying to get turrets down, and he's kind of already taken, like, I think a little bit too much damage to be completely comfortable. But all things said and done, it's not too bad. 9 SCVs. He's got, you know, these Marines out, and he's getting up his production. Stims on the way. Multiple siege tanks out. He's actually dealt with it very well. Pull SCVs away. Always have the bio on point. Always react very quickly. Using a tank evac to reposition is very good for just, shutting down those units as soon as they drop down. And that'll make a very big difference. So we're just going to keep it on Showtime's view here. You guys can keep on watching that while I answer any more questions, and then we finish up. What would you do if Terran was dropping on your main just as you drop on them, says Warratek. Well, that's something which is very important. It's usually you want to be trying to leave your mothership core at home. Your mothership core stays always. I can go back even... actually, I can't go back in this game because it's the shitty replay format, sorry. That's why we use the other replay format. This one doesn't have a bar. So, yeah, basically, you just leave your mothership core at home, and then you can warp in more units at home. The thing is, your opponent's only going to have a single medevac with like a bunch of Marines and a mine. You know, they're not going to have 3 medevacs with stim at this point. It's not actually that frightening a prospect. So with warp-ins in your mothership core, you can deal with it. It definitely gets messier though. So what we noticed, remember in that new Gettysburg game, is we saw Showtime specifically move out and try to hunt down the medevac on the map and push it off the map. He rotated his observer to try and get warning of what he felt was the one angle on which he was exposed against that drop. So he did 2 things. He tried to hunt the Warp Prism down, tried to push it back, which actually worked, but he wasn't sure if it had worked, so he also sent an observer to spot. And that will do the job. The thing is, if your opponent drops you at the same time and you've just warped in, you might think, well, what if that happens? Then you don't have warp-ins, and then he finds a spot where there's no pylon, you're just screwed, right? Nope, because he doesn't have a medevac and those units there, and all your units are on his side of the map. You should be able to do massive damage to him. And I'd say usually, I mean, it depends on your handling and the stressful situation, but I'd say, I don't know, it's probably 50-50, but it can fall apart just as quickly for the Terran as it can for the Protoss. Here's the big blunder for Showtime. Well, we actually get to see pretty much what your question is. What if they drop while you're over here? So let's go back to how this mistake happened. His whole army was moving out for an attack, and he had a gap in vision. Needed to control this watchtower. Because he didn't have that, Showtime could only see here, 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 and here. He was very worried about his left-hand side. He saw this as the point of contention. He pushed his army down here while already having great observer vision. Huge gaping holes in this right-hand side. A single drop came in and just killed 20 probes. A massacre. However, even though that was a really bad situation, which was completely unwarranted, notice how Showtime continues with this 1-2 punch, which we've seen from him so much. The main army threatens, it forces the army to stay there and defend. Meanwhile, the drop shreds workers and starts to equalize that damage a little bit. This is still better for Terran than it is for Protoss. Because of mules, Terran can afford to trade off kind of small numbers of, or medium numbers of workers a bit easier than Protoss can. But it's definitely something where Showtime made the best of a bad situation there. So that was actually a very timely question. Well done. Alright, so guys, we are going to finish up now. This game goes on and turns into like a big messy base trade, but you can really just see the annoyingness of this Warp Prism, of this kind of 1-2 poking, pressuring play. And that's what we wanted to talk about here. Let's finish up. That's what we wanted to talk about. We wanted to talk about that idea of dictating the pace of the game. I feel like too many Protoss players are just pulling into their shell and just sitting back and trying to take third bases and fourth bases without ever putting any pressure back on the Terran. And I know a lot of Protoss players aren't doing that and are putting the pressure on, but I feel like there's maybe like 35% or something of Protoss players on ladder who are like getting way too defensive. If the Terran opens up with this aggressive opening, they kind of just like get forced back into this kind of lazy comfort zone. So yeah. I'm guessing she was eating something. I promise my girlfriend doesn't normally speak like that. So yeah, basically, Terran really struggle against Warp Prisms. If you talk to Terran players, they really struggle with them. And also Terran players feel very forced to put damage onto Protoss early on. So because of that, sorry about that, guys. We had a little bit of a micro disconnect there. So, okay, so that cut out, I think, about just 1 minute ago. So I was just saying how really sorry for you guys on YouTube as well. I don't know why it keeps doing this micro disconnect. I'm going to reinstall the drivers. So anyway, where were we? We were just saying how basically, because of the way Terran hate Warp Prisms. So Terran hate Warp Prisms. Also, Terran feel pressured to do damage, so Protoss can't just be super greedy. You really want to refine this defense early on. If you scout gas first or double gas opening very early on, even if they're expanding behind it, just go for that robo, add 2 more gateways, cut the Twilight Council in the initial stages, and with this build you can just get out 3-4 gateway units at your natural right on 4 minutes. You can have the Mothership Core in the main with a beautiful pylon triangle, and then you can warp in units almost immediately as the pressure's hitting, whilst also having that Warp Prism already on the way to counterattack across that map and create a living nightmare. You deflect one wave of Terran aggression, and then you're on their side of the map and they're like panicking and freaking out and struggling to keep up with this incredibly mobile Warp Prism, which can just dance around their base and do heaps of damage. I have a knife says, when do you add the Twilight? So you add the Twilight, along with your Forge or double Forge around the time the third Nexus goes down. So basically when you're transitioning behind this. If you want to do this in a very typical way with 3 gates, if you want, you just keep warping it off those 3 gates in that Warp Prism, and then as you have the money, you're like, oh bam, double Forge, Twilight, third base, or something along those lines. Really depends how you want to transition from there. There's heaps of choices available, but today we really were just focusing on that early stage, shut down the aggression, get back to their side of the map with the Warp Prism, and the next few minutes are all about you keeping the Terran in his corner of the map, rather than you worrying about drops coming in from every different angle and just defending for the entire game. So it's a great way to put the pressure back on Terran without necessarily going all in. And yeah, that should be awesome. So thanks for hanging out, guys. Sorry for the mic issues today. I'm going to try and get that sorted out. So thanks for hanging out. Don't forget to hug a watermelon, kick a walrus, and of course, punch a cactus to the moon. I'll catch you guys next time. Goodbye and good night.